Alan Wake 2 teaches you how to engage with media. I'm not saying this figuratively or as a joke. No, I mean textbook stuff, literary theory, the whole shebang. Don't believe me? Well, let me explain how. Alright, let's start with a simple question. Can you play Alan Wake 2 without having played the first game? It's an innocuous thing to ask. When a big sequel creates a lot of buzz, a pertinent thought will be, can I jump straight into this or do I need to do my homework first? And the answer is both pretty straightforward and endlessly complicated. Alan Wake 2 is a sequel to Remedy Entertainment's 2010 classic about the titular writer whose fiction turns into reality. And since Remedy makes extravagant action games, this also involves Alan shooting his own characters right in the face. Alan Wake 2 is a story 13 years in the making, and while it does continue the narrative of the first game, the plot itself is largely self-contained and made to be understood without much prior knowledge. But still, it is a sequel. There is a big fat 2 slapped into the opening. There are aspects of the story that you will appreciate more if you are familiar with the first game. And Alan Wake 1 is not a long game, so why not get it out the way just to be safe? But you know, part of the wider meta-narrative strands of Alan Wake are brought on by overt references to Remedy's prior title, Max Payne. Shouldn't you really play that as well before committing yourself to Alan Wake? And that game also has its own meta aspects. So really, you also kinda need to be familiar with the tropes and cliches that Max Payne draws on and
I was in a graphic novel. Funny as hell. It was the most horrible thing I could think of.
Well, where does it end? Alan Wake 2 is a story spun into a web of adjacent works. Nearly every game Remedy has made in the past has something that ties into this game. They're all simultaneously superfluous yet necessary to understand Alan Wake 2. There is a foundational scene in the game. Alan finds himself trapped in the dark place, a nightmare world where the lines between ideas and reality are blurred. In this scene, he's inexplicably a guest on a dreamlike talk show. On the surface, this scene revolves around Alan getting interviewed about a new book release. Another guest is Sam Lake, who's introduced as the actor who plays the star role of Alex Casey in the movie adaptation of Alan's prior crime thriller series.
Why the hell did you kill Casey? What the hell were you thinking, man? Good riddance.
The plot of the first game is kicked off by Alan killing off Casey in the last installment of the series, because he did not want to be stuck writing crime thrillers. Alan was uninvolved in the creation of the movie, and the loss of creative control wears down on him.
They're their own thing. They've gone with choices that are different from mine.
This scene conveys the central dilemma of Alan's character. He's possessive and protective of his prior work, but simultaneously feels like it's beneath him. He wants to move on to more fulfilling endeavors, but also can't stand people taking ownership of what he left behind. And what if there isn't anything for him to move on to? What if he'll never be anything but a hacky crime writer?
You're a lousy writer! Cheap thrills and pretentious shit! That's all you're good for! Just look at me! Look at your work!
What complicates this scene is that this other guest is actually a real person. Alex Casey is not just a fictional character, but an FBI agent who features prominently in the plot. He's the partner of Saga Anderson, the deuteragonist of the game. Casey is a core mystery, because who came first? This is a story about fiction turning into reality, and suddenly the main character of Alan's books shows up. It doesn't take a genius to put two and two together. But is it that simple? Casey seemingly existed before Alan's books and is aware of and annoyed by them. And to add to this, Sam Lake, the real actual person filmed there, is the writer and creative director at Remedy. He created Alan Wake, he probably wrote this scene. And the character of Alex Casey is also very clearly a send-up to Sam Lake's own fictional creation, Max Payne. With this in mind, it's hard to separate the fact that Max Payne himself also had a troubled adventure on the silver screen, one in which Sam Lake also had a very limited involvement.
Yeah, maybe not the best movie.
So the totality of this scene is Sam Lake, the writer, playing the actor Sam Lake, who plays Alex Casey, a character written by the fictional author Alan Wake, who in reality was written by Sam Lake, the writer. This scene is a conversation between the real Sam Lake and his creative work, on top of being an investigation of Alan Wake's inner headspace.
I'm a huge fan of your books.
You can read this scene as is, without being aware of the broader context. The vibe and feel is perfectly conveyed on its own. The performances are still great, everything works as a standalone scene. But the more you can draw upon a wider understanding, the more meaningful the scene becomes.
I'm not Alex Casey. I only play him in the movies. He's just a fictional character.
This is emblematic of the writing of Alan Wake 2. It's rich with texture composed of layers upon layers of recursive elements that go beyond the text of the game itself.
Yes, there is a truth in art. There is something we find out through art that is not formulaic, that is not subject to precisely definable rules, and this gives the lie to positivism.
This relation between specific meaning and broad understanding is at the heart of what is fascinating about the game. It almost forms a weird simulacra of the story itself.
I mean, the writer is physically in his writer's room, trapped there, and he projects himself out to this dark dream of New York through the story he is writing.
In his part of the story, Alan is trapped in the writer's room. He cannot directly do anything from there except to write. But since his writing affects reality, he's able to write himself into the story as a character in order to interact with the outside. What complicates matters again is that his influence is limited. In order to navigate the dark place, he draws on Casey as a medium to change the dreamscape of the dark place. He uses a character that he is intimately familiar with as a known variable in this realm that exists outside logic. Casey is an anchor point Alan can use to spin out stories that help him explore the dark place. So by following flashes of inspiration, he ends up writing a story about Alex Casey investigating a string of murders perpetrated by a cult in New York. But these events are not kept to the dark place. The quote-unquote real Alex Casey also mentioned a past cult case in New York. This mirrors Saga's uncovering of a cult in her investigation of Bright Falls. Alan draws upon these seemingly real events to inform the story he's writing, which in turn reshapes the world. This new reality leads him to a new understanding of the story he's writing, leading him to further writing. And it is left uncertain whether Casey's initial cult case was ever even real, or if it was always just the subject of Alan's writing. Like, what does real even mean in a story like this?
The irony of being trapped in a postmodern detective story.
But more importantly, we have a word for this process of interpretation and reinterpretation.
By itself, it's not a new idea, this hermeneutics, this science of interpretation.
Hermeneutics is one of the foundational approaches to art and literature. It's the study of interpretation and understanding. Whenever you engage with anything really, be it a book, a dance class or a wedding, your understanding of it is determined by your previous set of experience. So when you read a sci-fi book, your understanding of it will be influenced by having watched Star Wars. How you felt about gym class as a kid probably factors into whether you'll enjoy those dance lessons. And our collective tales of romance shape our perception of what a wedding should look like.
What emerges is a sort of dialectical relationship between a text or the whole domain of human culture. We go into that with certain expectations, and eventually we find these expectations thwarted. When our expectations are thwarted, we renew our interpretation. We come back, we create a new set of expectations, and we carry those around and examine the text of the world or the text of culture. It gets thwarted eventually, we come back and we renew our interpretation. This is called the hermeneutic circle. It is the logic of question and answer.
Our understanding of the world informs how we interpret a piece of media. And the meaning we gain from that becomes part of our new foundation for understanding the world. The whole determines the singular, and the singular influence the whole.
First time you read something like the complete works of Shakespeare, you learn something from it, unless you're a complete dunderhead.
The important thing with hermeneutics is that there is no singular true interpretation. Like, if you ever had a book assignment and felt frustrated that the teacher couldn't just tell you what the right answer was, this is why. The act of interpreting will always be subjective and situated in time and space. But that does not mean that there aren't good and bad reads on a text. And the way to make better interpretations is through this cyclical act of interpretation and reinterpretation.
How is it possible that there can be knowledge that I get from Shakespeare but there's no method for it.
It might seem like we oscillate between two static states, but through this process, both our understanding of the specific text and the broader world slowly morph into something entirely different from their outset. With each pivot from interpretation to new understanding and back to reinterpretation, we slowly move toward deeper understanding, revealing the true shape of this process.
It's a spiral.
Alan Wake 2 is filled with recursive elements. My favorite is the relation between Alan Wake himself and his predecessor Tom Zane, who both simultaneously exist as writers in the story and as fictionalized versions of themselves. And both of them have, at different points in time, written about each other, possibly even having written each other into existence.
My mind swirled. I'd given the clicker to Alice, yet it was here. Zane had written it into existence, in a story I had written.
This of course opens the question of which one of them is the true writer. One of them must be the Genesis. And I think the game itself gives a pretty clear answer. They are essentially one and the same. They are separate insofar they occupy different points in the spiral, both informing each other and being constituted by what came before.
Time is a story. I'm calling you from a different point in that story.
And that's hermeneutics. Nearly every plot element of the game is structured like this. Alan's doppelganger, Mr. Scratch, the mind-bending causality of Alex Casey, the structure of the game itself with its dual protagonist, and all the important but ultimately inconsequential references to Remedy's broader oeuvre. They have taken the actual ontology of hermeneutical thought and written it into the mechanics of the world itself. When you reach what seems like the end, the game invites you to play again, now with a new understanding. And I don't think it's by accident that you probably also want to check out Remedy's previous titles or the stuff that inspired them to make this game. And maybe you'll even return back to Alan Wake 2 after that and get a whole new meaning out of the game. When I asked whether you should play the first game before the sequel, the answer was yes. But really, you should also play Alan Wake 2 before you play Alan Wake 2.
I read Plato when I was 20, I read Aristotle when I was 25, but if I want to go back and reclaim Aristotle and Plato, I must read it again and reabsorb Aristotle and Plato based upon the changes in my knowledge, based upon the changes in society as a whole, based upon our new thinking about Aristotle and Plato.
By trying to understand the plot in this game, you are gracefully guided toward the process of sense-making, toward participating in hermeneutics. And after playing Alan Wake 2, you are probably ready to move on to something different. Maybe something new or something old, because making sense is not something you do once. It's not a neat circle, but an ever-expanding spiral. There is no final end goal, no point where we finally reveal the truth of a piece of art. You can play Alan Wake 2 once, have a great time, and be done with it. The beauty of this game as art is that it invites you to further engage with the act of interpretation, to immerse yourself in the spiral of hermeneutics.